Hey everyone, this is Tim. I have a really wonderful talk for you today with the mixing team from Netflix hit animated series, Arcane. Penny Harold and Andy Lange really dig into the immense challenge of making this show sound so great, which it does. This is actually kind of a part one to Tonebender's Arcane coverage. Coming up in a couple weeks, there will be a second episode with the sound editorial team and the music team. I was lucky enough to go visit the Riot Games campus in California to talk to the supervising sound editors, Elliot Connors and Brad Beaumont, and the composers, Alex Seaver and Alex Temple. That one is a really, really great episode. So if you enjoy this one, make sure to head back to the feed to hear the follow-up in a few weeks. You won't regret it. Okay, let's get into my talk with Penny and Andy from Arcane Season 2. Welcome to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips, with 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I'm looking forward to talking to the re-recording mix team from Arcane Season 2. This Netflix series has stormed out of the gates as a guiding light in what animation can sound like. I'm talking with the Series 2 re-recording mixers today about how they made the series sound so visceral and alive. First up, we have Penny Harold. Penny is a 4-time Emmy-nominated re-recording mixer with nearly 20 years of industry experience. Her recent mix credits include the highly critically acclaimed TV series Beef, which I was a big fan of, and an even bigger fan of Only Murders in the Building. On Arcane, Penny was on the music and dialogue side of the faders. I just recently met Penny in person at the LA Tonebender Sound Design Meetup. It's lovely to see you again, Penny. Thanks for coming out to that meetup.
Thanks so much. It was a really good time, and it was great to meet you too.
Joining Penny is her mix partner on Arcane, Andy Lange. Andy is a 3-time Emmy-nominated mixer and was on the faders with Penny for Beef and Murders in the Building as well. Andy was obviously on sound effects for this series. Andy, it's wonderful to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's great to be here.
So before we crack open your work on Arcane, you two have worked together on a bunch of series. Can you talk to me about what it is about your personalities and the way you work that made it click so you guys make a good team?
Yeah, we've worked together for about 6 years now, and I think what really makes us click is that we're both kind of perfectionists. We both have a hard time letting things go if it's not exactly how we want it.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Right. And so I think naturally we just kind of seem to click in that way, but also I think we just share like an instinct for sound. You know, I've worked with other mixers before, and sometimes they'll do something and you're like, oh, that's not quite how, I hear it in my head, which doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just with Andy, it's always kind of felt like, oh, we're in the same space.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think you nailed it. Our instincts are definitely very similar. And I think we also check our egos at the door.
Yeah.
We're always like asking each other for feedback. And even if like the other mixer has a thought, we don't hesitate to chime in and make suggestions. And I think that's really great.
What was the first project you worked on together?
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. That's one of my favorite shows. I love that show.
The 2 last seasons we did together. It's really fun.
So let's get to Arcane. As I mentioned in the intro, it really seems to have kind of changed what people's thoughts and perceptions of what an animated series can be. It's pushed boundaries. It's huge in both scale in terms of like what it looks and sounds like, but also just in terms of the ambition of the plot. Like there's massive amount of story and character going on. But one of the most interesting things I find with it is its approach to music. For those that haven't seen it, first off, get out there and see it. Secondly, each episode has kind of what you would originally think are needle drops, but they're songs written for each episode, but they're approached in the mix kind of like a needle drop. And then there's also a score that can get massive at times. During these, we're calling needle drops, because I don't know what the correct word is, because I don't know that a series has really done this before. The music has to play front and center, but there's also action happening.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about how those scenes came together when the music has to play crisp and clean, but there's also story being told?
That was very important from the beginning that, Christian, our showrunner, wanted those OST songs, those needle drops, to sound like their album version. Obviously I could help out. I can dip here and there, like incrementally for sound effects. And sometimes I didn't have to. Sometimes there are sequences where they made it so it was just the song and there was like the sound effects took a back seat. But there's some sequences where that's not the case at all. There's a lot of them. It was really like, I have to speak to Andy's mixing ability here. It was kind of, he had to get it all through, and it was just surgical.
That was definitely like the biggest challenge, I think, for me on the effects. We have these giant sequences, the action scenes, the fight scenes, and they're all under these big needle drop songs. That was always the challenge, was finding the pocket for the effects. It was a lot of give and take. We would kind of do a first pass and get it close, but then we would really surgically go through and be like, oh, there's a break between lyrics right here. What are the effects doing? Can we get something through? Can we hit this cut? It was very challenging, and they want the music front and center. The music's king, but we also want to feel those impacts and feel the effects. So that was always the challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think you can say that any sound effects you hear during those big sequences were extremely purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
Took a lot of time and just decision making on what's the important part of this, like what's important to hear, like how can we most efficiently tell a story with this little few frames we have where the music just takes a little break.
Mm-hmm.
He had to just like get stuff through quickly.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
As the show moved along, did you develop an approach on how these needle drop type songs kind of work within the world of Arcane?
There was definitely a lot more music in season 2 compared to season 1. We definitely had developed a rhythm and a workflow for how we attack each episode. Each episode we mixed over 5 days, with a 6th day to come back later to do like final tweaks. And so Monday through Wednesday was kind of our first pass, because we would play back for Brad and Elliot, our sound supervisors, on Wednesday. That whole time we're flying through it, we do kind of a pre-dub pass on a few scenes, and then we'll link up, move through each scene. And my pre-dub pass is a lot of panning and fine-tuning, setting reverbs, and then when we link up and the music's in there, it will all change. So like I said, we'll do like a first pass, and then we'll really fine-tune and get into the weeds and try to hit each cut.
During that first pass, I tend to hold off on mixing the music in so that Andy can actually hear his backgrounds and what he's doing. And then we put the music in. And like you said, everything changes. And I was thinking about this. I wish there was some magic button, some magic plugin, something that made it over time like, oh, well, this is exactly what we did to make it work. And there was really never that, with maybe one exception. It was all just like going through it over and over and just like making it big in the room, checking the 2-track.
Yep.
Where are we hearing our limiters hit our down mixes too much? Going back to the bigs. What can we do to pull it back and not hit those limiters, but is it still as impactful in the room?
Right.
So it was just a constant like checking, rechecking process. Like there was no magic wand.
Yeah.
We just had to there was nothing to do but just get through it.
Yeah, the 2-track was very important to be thinking about all the time for Riot and our showrunner, for Christian. A lot of the audience will be watching on phones, for better or worse. And so we also had a sound bar set up on the stage. We called it the shit bar. And so we were constantly checking the 2-track, checking the 5-1, checking the shit bar. A lot of times, oh yeah, the limiters are working a little hard here. What can we do to get this transient through?
The biggest instances of like that where we spent like days on this was in season 2, episode 1, during the fight, the big attack during the memorial service, and this berserker lands. Andy's process for this show was we would take the show home with us between days 5 and 6. We would take the show home and we would all sit with it and listen to it. And we had already worked on this moment over and over. Like I held the music back because the music, of course, had a big impact when this huge guy lands.
Yeah.
And like, you know, there's all this sub going out and like, how much do we pull back? And that was like, every time I watch that episode, I still think of like how hard we fought for that land to sound impactful on the two track.
Berserker land, using like different harmonic distortion. How can we get this to feel beefy on the two track? And the send that we had feeding the two track with the limiter, we actually turned the send down a couple dB to kind of give the limiter some breathing room. And that really helped on the two track to make all the transients kind of pop a little bit more. So we kind of figured that out as we went along.
So you'll notice like we talk a lot about the two track, which I think is surprising to some of like our peers we've talked to, is because the show is so epic and so cinematic. And it was always our job to make it sound as like big and impactful as possible on the stage, but to always respect the medium that we were mixing for, which is television. And like Andy said, this has a younger demographic. People are watching on phones. People are watching on laptops.
My son watched it on his iPad.
Oh my God.
Yes, exactly.
You try and raise him right, you know, but
I know. There's only so much you can do.
Right.
At the end of the day, it was always our job to make sure it sounded as big as we could get it on the two track.
Yeah. And we complicated it even more for season 2 because we mixed the season actually in 916. So that kind of created a bunch of more complications. We had to kind of make sure everything was translating and folding down correctly.
916. So that kind of leads into the question I was about to ask. As we discussed earlier, the show has needle drops, but they're not really needle drops in the traditional sense because Alex Seaver, composer, wrote these songs for the series. When you have control over the songwriting process, the producing process, normally when you get a needle drop, you just get the stereo mix from the album. Were you getting surround tracks for these songs, or?
I was getting the stereo mix from the album. Those needle drops, and we can call them needle drops, that's fine. Those OST songs, those needle drops went through such a rigorous, like, production, like producing process and notes process. And by the time it came to me, they had it exactly where they wanted it. You know, usually when you get a needle drop, like it's not going to sound necessarily like the album version in the show because there's all these things I have to do to it to make, you know, dialogue cut through, to help sound design cut through when we need it. And they wanted it to sound like the album version in the show. I just got the stereo and that was fine. We made it work.
One of the many ways that Arcane was such a unique project was how much time, you know, our friends at Riot worked on this stuff before it even came to us. And so, yeah, by the time it comes to us, what a treat for like how amazing all the material already was and kind of close. And it gave us the opportunity to really get in the weeds and really make everything pop, including the music and just like how Elliot, who's our, you know, co-sound supervisor and sound designer, he worked with our music department. How can sound design complement the music and how can the music complement the sound design? Like that never happens on another series, right? In episode 3, the big song To Ashes and Blood by Woodkid, like there was that great moment with the anomaly where they kind of crafted this amazing like stutter effect that went right along with the music. That's so cool that they got to do that ahead of time.
Right. He like was able to cut that up and give me all these pieces of it. Elliot cut the music up and delivered that to me. Then I was able to just like play with panning and volume and stuff and just like get it to really hit. So that was very fun.
That particular needle drop is impressive because it's a long one too. Like it's not a 30-second thing.
Yeah.
It's like 3.5 minutes or something.
Right.
It is. I rewatched it recently. I was like, oh man, this thing's still going.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. It's amazing.
I didn't feel that when I watched it originally.
No, not when you watch it originally.
I know, right?
Yeah, because the song's so good too. It's really
And it's so fun reading comments. Like I was looking at some fan comments and people were like, I will never forget the first time I watched this song in my whole life. I will never forget. So awesome. Actually, funny story about that particular song. My wife, Jessica Friedman, is a session singer, and just by coincidence, through her own separate channels, she was hired to sing backgrounds on that song. So she's singing along with like the kids choir. It's like 10 women and 10 kids singing that made up language in the background of that song. So it's kind of a fun small town collab on Arcane.
Wow, that's a strangely small world there. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
I want to tell you all about a really cool mic that I've been using a lot lately in my own work. It's called the O-Mini, and it's a miniature omnidirectional mic with a really neutral frequency response. I recently went to a frozen pond to record some skating sounds. When you record skating in an actual rink, you quickly find out that they are extremely reverberant. So I wanted to record outdoors where there's no walls for the sounds to bounce off of. So I grabbed my pair of O-Minis and I taped them to my legs just above my skates, and I hit the ice. The O-Minis handled the cold without issue, and I got the sounds I was after. There are a couple cool things about this mic that drew me to it. First up, each mic is handmade by Chris Trevino, a practicing field recordist and a really engaged member of the sound community. He puts a lot of work into making and testing each mic to ensure they live up to his high standards. Secondly, they are ultrasonic capable, which makes manipulating my recordings with them a lot of fun. I have 2 O-Minis personally, and they have been great to work with. In addition to the skating sounds, I've recorded other things like footsteps in snow, paper foley, and lots more. Maybe my favorite things about the O-Minis is the price. They are extremely affordable. At $150 American for a stereo match pair, they offer a lot of value. I suggest you give them a try. At this price, you really can't go wrong. To learn more, head to chrisatrevino.com or click on the link in the description of this episode in your podcast app. We have mentioned the amount of time and care that went into this show. If we back time it up, I think that means that some of the dialogue was recorded during COVID times when people are recording in closets and, blanket forts. When I'm watching the show, I couldn't feel that. Like everything felt of one world. So I'm assuming that was just super easy, right? And you just put through the faders up?
Yeah, exactly. No, that was definitely a challenge, especially the earliest episodes of season 2. You could really hear a lot of those home records. I have to say, for the most part, our cast did a really good job, and Brad Beaumont, our amazing sound supervisor, took a lot of care to make sure everybody had the best setup they possibly could under the circumstances. So, it was a combo of EQing and just a combo of compression. We got there. One of the interesting things that we did do with dialogue in this show is we've talked a lot about how big the music is, how big the sound effects are. But through all of that, the dialogue has to sit right up front. We have to hear it. That was always a challenge in season 1. But with season 2, the scale of it just being that much bigger, it was just that much harder. So Brad Beaumont and I spent a lot of time just testing out compressors and stuff and trying to figure out what can get us where we need to be. And we ended up landing on Wave CLA 76, which in hindsight, I love that because it makes so much sense because that is such a classic music compressor. And with Christian's background in music, this was the style of compression he loved. But it also just, all of a sudden, everything just kind of gelled in ways it hadn't before. Also, very fun fact, and this definitely speaks to the support we got from Riot throughout the process, and how their attention to quality was always their biggest priority. By the time we figured out the best compressor for the dialogue chain, we had actually already mixed 4 episodes of season 2.
Wow.
And so we went back. We went back.
Yeah.
And, we didn't have to do everything all over again because the sound design and the music was kind of sitting where it needed to be. If anything, it gave us opportunity to push that stuff a little louder. But yeah, Andy and I had to go back. It took about a day an episode and remix the dialogue and the Foley. It was such a great opportunity to do. And also just as a mixer, to be able to hear work you've done a little bit differently and hear these steps that you can take to make something just sound that much better was pretty cool.
Compressing the dialogue more in that way also, it ended up just making everything kind of click because we also ended up changing the level we were mixing at.
Your reference level in the room, you mean?
Exactly. Yes. And then season 2, we ended up mixing it at 80. it just kind of made everything lock in more, and everything really just feels like it's controlled and popping a little bit more than season one. Season one sounds great, don't get me wrong, but season two is just like, oh yeah, there we go.
No, yes, and I've had so many people, which is really cool, come up to me, like our peers, and say, "Oh, season one sounded so great," back when we did it, and it feels really nice. And what's so interesting about working with this group of people from Riot is that the goal was never to just make it sound as good as season one. The goal was, how can we raise the bar? What can we do to make it even better and different? And changing that reference level in the room, that's a 3 dB difference, because we mixed season one at 83. We mixed season two at 80. Just embracing, again, like the medium we were mixing for. No matter what, I think this project was going to be super cinematic. We did not have to go crazy with dynamics. Like he said, like having this a little bit more controlled mix was
the key. It was kind of like what made everything kind of lock in.
Right.
One of the many other reasons Arcane is such a unique show and kind of like a dream project for a mixer, it's like to be given like the time to really dig in. We often work on these series where we have 1, 2, 3 mix days per episode. To have more time to really dig in, that is such a luxury.
I think you can hear it in the end result too.
And it's
definitely.
And it's so great that Riot was willing to do what they had to do to make that happen and to truly create something extraordinary. Let's find this amazing animation company, and they're going to spend, so long and hire hundreds of people to make this incredible picture. For sound, how are we going to turn heads? That was always the thing. How are we going to raise the bar?
It's talking about time for the finale. We actually got 3 weeks to mix that.
Wow.
Which for television, it's not like it doesn't ever happen, but it's so rare.
Well, let's dig into that episode now that we brought it up, because the images in this series are so beautiful and groundbreaking, I guess. The sound has pressure on it to keep up that pace.
Absolutely.
And in the last episode, there's a whole sequence with like an anti-gravity chamber. It's one of the few times where the sound does a massive change, but the pictures don't necessarily do a massive change, if that makes sense. Like lots of times the sound is following, all of a sudden the picture has an entirely different kind of animation going on.
Right.
In this one is just a long sequence where all of a sudden there's massive EQing and strange compressions going on and effects. Do you want to talk about how you approach this anti-gravity scene and the stylistic choices that were made?
Yeah, the anti-gravity scene was a really fun sequence. You see it in a lot of shows or movies. There's like a space scene. The easy thing to do is just, let's just muffle everything. But no, Riot, Elliot, and Brad, they want to do something, really awesome. We all want to make it really special, and figuring out of how are we going to do this. And I think like when we were doing our first pass on that episode, we still hadn't kind of figured it out. And we kind of had like placeholder stuff in there, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and yeah, the music cuts out a few times in that sequence. So they really wanted the sound to shine and take the lead. Elliot came up with this really cool controlled distortion effect that he kind of rendered into all the sound effects. And Brad and Penny came up with a really cool slapper plugin setting, right?
Right, for the voices. I will say that scene, I think we mixed and remixed that scene maybe like half a dozen times. That was weirdly the most difficult scene in the finale to mix, not just by the amount of work, but because we all couldn't wrap our heads around like how this should sound. And like we all had an idea, but of course then we get to the mix stage, we're like, that's just not quite right. And I think you nailed it, because like the visuals don't change. And one thing that's interesting that music did there that really raised the bar to make sound effects that have to do something special is the music kind of got muted as well. It's all muted, but still has to be really punchy. And, the easy thing to do would have been to just like, hit us in the face with the music. But because the way the music came to me, it raised the stakes for us. So all the stuff Elliot came up with and Andy put in for all the explosions and stuff was really unique. But Brad had to figure out, what do their voices sound like? That was really hard too. And like I said, we went through a ton of versions of that until we landed on this cool stuttery thing he did. And I put it through different filters. I think it was an Altiverb and a Slapper, actually.
Yeah. And then I think you gave me the preset also. So I was put it on certain effects to kind of make everything kind of feel united in that sound world.
Sure.
Yeah, and the effects were distorted in a way where certain ones I remember we had to kind of pull back a little bit because when you, on the fold down, it almost sounded like it was like overmodulating a little too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had to kind of find that right balance, but I think it really came together. It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
When scenes are really great, they become iconic in a way that they get repeated. So, like the classic, like Western standoff, like that kind of sound. I feel like that anti-gravity scene is going to be something that directors come to sound teams in the future and reference and are like, we got to do this kind of thing.
That's amazing.
It's a really amazing sequence that as a sound person, while I was watching it, I always know when I'm affected by something heavily because I lean forward, like I'm on my couch leaning back all comfy, and then all of a sudden I'm on the balls of my feet at the front of the couch leaning forward, and that scene does that to you. So congratulations on pulling that off. It's really impressive.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question that's maybe a little different. If I'm the producer of Arcane, and I've got this amazing series with artwork and the sound is going to be humongous, like on a different planet, kind of sci-fi, kind of steampunky. My first thought isn't, let's get the sound team from Only Murders in the Building. How did you guys get this gig? Like, Only Murders in the Building was obviously a award-nominated show, but the challenges are so different.
Absolutely. It all connects. So when they were first looking for a mixed team for season 1, what they had in mind was like, we don't want a feature mix team just because we need a team that's comfortable with like broadcast and can actually get this done in the amount of time we have budgeted. They didn't want animation mixers because in their minds, they knew it also had to be bigger than that. Arcane is absolutely groundbreaking for animation. That's kind of how they landed on us. And I think it was just our charming personalities, maybe, that took it the rest of the way. But so much of what I've learned from Arcane and applied it to everything I've mixed thereafter. But I could say that of any show I ever mix. Like, you're always learning new tricks and how to do something better. If you're lucky, it's also how to do it faster.
I think they were looking for a couple mixers who were crazy enough to get on this roller coaster and
who would say yes to anything
right,
they asked.
And get it across the finish line and be willing to break habits and try some different crazy stuff, to make this thing really special.
The breaking habits part, I think, is important because I think there are a lot of mixers who probably would not have been willing to kind of change our ways of working the way that we did to work for this show. This was such a unique show. I mean, it was produced by a video game company, right? And they had not done linear entertainment before. And so they had this idea of how it all works, and it's not wrong. It's just different from how we're used to working and how most productions, sometimes work. Yeah, that willingness to just be like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Let's try it.
Let's do it.
Let's try something weird here.
That was a big deal.
I loved watching the show. Choices were made that were not expected, if that makes sense. Like, things sounded different than we're trained to expect them, but it still sounded grounded and real. You could hear everything when so much was going on. Arcane is a real groundbreaking series, and as I mentioned, I think that it's going to be the kind of show that mixers for the next decade are going to be presented when they start on a new show, saying, this is what we want it to sound like. Not meaning copy, but the feelings you get when you're watching that kind of show. Congratulations on the massive role you played in achieving that. I look forward to talking to you guys again in the future.
Thank you so much, Tim. This was such a pleasure.
Tim. Yeah, thank you so much.
Sound Ideas annual memberships put Sound Ideas' full range of over 600,000 sound effects, music tracks, and production elements at your fingertips. With 3 tiers to choose from based on your sound design needs. The Creator's Access Plan is perfect for the independent creator working on a smaller scale, looking for high-quality sound options at a great price. With up to 100 downloads, you'll enjoy significant savings compared to buying individual sounds. And you'll have free reign over Sound Ideas' extensive collection. Use the promo code TONEBENDERS50 for 50% off any Sound Ideas annual membership to amplify your future productions. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support. Thanks for listening.